The atmosphere among BTS fans once again turned warm when attention shifted to the genuine bond between the members, particularly after Suga carried out a small yet meaningful surprise for Jungkook, which soon became a widely discussed topic in South Korea's entertainment media. And interestingly, the moment also received commentary from J-Hope, who is known as one of the members with a naturally energetic and optimistic attitude, making his remarks add another layer of color to this simple story, since the public has long been familiar with the dynamics between the members, not only when they perform on stage, but also when they go through their daily routines. And in this situation, J-Hope appeared calm. He did not treat it as a dramatic headline, but instead gave the impression that he appreciated Suga's effort in showing care toward Jungkook. Because for J-Hope, togetherness in the group is not only about looking flawless in front of an audience, but also about how they support each other behind the scenes. Therefore, when the moment happened, J-Hope's reaction reflected his realistic character, highlighting how Suga, usually known as quiet and reserved, displayed a different side through a simple gesture directed at Jungkook. And this made fans feel that their interactions remained genuine despite the many years they have spent together. And within the flow of gossip circulating in media coverage, J-Hope's comments were more widely discussed because they were seen as a form of validation that the intimacy among the members is indeed authentic, not merely staged for public consumption. J-Hope emphasized the value of solidarity without the need for elaborate words. He appeared with an acknowledgement that felt light, so when the media reported it, the public received an image that behind their global fame, there is still space for small gestures that hold even greater meaning. And for many entertainment observers, this showed J-Hope's consistency in maintaining the group's harmony. From the very beginning, he has often positioned himself as the encourager, and in this instance, he remained faithful to that role. What stood out was how the public perceived his commentary as genuine rather than manufactured, since J-Hope is known for rarely speaking about matters unless he believes there is true value to highlight. So when he finally gave his thoughts on Suga's surprise for Jungkook, the atmosphere on social media became livelier, with fans sharing the news repeatedly, adding their own perspectives and turning it into a broader discussion. And for most, as the story continued to ripple through various media outlets, J-Hope's presence in the conversation surrounding Suga's gesture toward Jungkook gradually developed into a point of interest on its own, because observers noted how his role often carries the balance within the group's internal dynamics, and in this case, his comments highlighted not only the significance of Suga's effort, but also the way the members continue to maintain closeness despite the constant demands of schedules, rehearsals, and public appearances, with J-Hope emphasizing through his manner of speaking that such moments are what keep the group grounded, reminding both fans and outsiders that their friendship remains intact even under the weight of global recognition. And within the context of gossip reporting, the narrative expanded to describe how J-Hope observed the interaction with a sense of warmth that mirrored his established reputation, because people have often associated him with being the member who uplifts others with positivity. And in this event, his ability to appreciate Suga's quieter style of expression demonstrated how each member values the unique qualities of the others, turning what could have been a passing moment into a reflection of long-term camaraderie. And as coverage grew more detailed, the focus shifted toward how the group's image is sustained not by grand performances alone, but by these smaller, unpolished fragments of reality that allow fans to connect on a personal level, with J-Hope serving as the bridge that connects the surprise itself to a broader meaning about togetherness, reinforcing the idea that their bond extends beyond professional collaboration. An analyst within the entertainment industry began pointing out how his remarks created an echo among fans who often look for reassurance that the relationships they admire are authentic, which is why the acknowledgement gained attraction across platforms, from television talk shows to online forums, where participants dissected the nuances of his words and linked them to previous examples of his supportive behavior. And through this process, the gossip took on a tone that was less about sensationalism and more about reflection, as audiences recognized how steady affirmation from a member like J-Hope serves as evidence of stability within the group, especially at a time when fans are constantly monitoring signs of change or distance. And what emerged was a portrayal of a unit that continues to thrive through subtle yet meaningful actions, with J-Hope's commentary acting as a gentle anchor that keeps the narrative focused on shared values rather than fleeting spectacle. And within the flow of the day, the media highlighted how his consistent presence in discussions reinforces his role, not only as an entertainer, but as a reliable participant in the team's shared journey. So the gossip surrounding this moment became less about the surprise itself and more about the appreciation of it, filtered through J-Hope's steady lens, which ultimately reminded audiences that beyond the lights and cameras, the real story lies in how these individuals continued to nurture each other's growth and comfort, making his voice in this instance not just a casual remark, but an integral part of how the episode was received, understood, and remembered by those who follow every step of their career with careful attention. As the media cycle extended further into the day, J-Hope's acknowledgement of Suga's gesture toward Jungkook began to shape a broader conversation not only among fans, but also within entertainment commentary circles that sought to analyze how such simple moments continue to define the narrative of BTS. Because while the spectacle of their global performances often dominates headlines, it is the quieter exchanges that tend to resonate deeply with the public. And J-Hope's decision to highlight the value of Suga's action added an interpretive layer that made the story endure beyond its initial spark, with commentators noting that his observations framed the event as an example of how genuine bonds sustain their group dynamic even under constant scrutiny. And as these discussions unfolded, the gossip evolved into a reflection on the consistency of J-Hope's character, since he has repeatedly been recognized as someone who notices the details of others and translates them into a broader message of unity, which is why his presence in this instance carried weight, pushing the narrative from a single surprise to a collective story of mutual regard. And across fan communities, this interpretation was welcomed because it validated the emotional investment many already felt, reinforcing their belief that the group's relationships extend beyond the spotlight, creating a sense of closeness between idols and their audience. And within the rhythm of the day, reports continued to highlight the ease with which J-Hope contextualized Suga's behavior without dramatization, maintaining a natural tone that made the event relatable. Because rather than turning it into an exaggerated display, his commentary framed it as part of daily life, where care is expressed through actions rather than elaborate gestures, which in turn aligned with the way many fans perceive the group's charm, rooted in authenticity and sincerity. And as journalists expanded their coverage, they began drawing comparisons to earlier moments when J-Hope similarly played a role in emphasizing the value of solidarity, thereby connecting his latest remark to a longer history of contributions that have subtly defined the group's public image. And for the entertainment industry, the interest lay in how one member's perspective could extend the relevance of a single gesture into an ongoing point of engagement, demonstrating the influence of interpersonal acknowledgement within celebrity culture. And in practical terms, the gossip traveled from online articles to broadcast commentary, circulating steadily without losing momentum because the subject matter was easy for audiences to absorb, requiring no sensational backdrop, only the simple recognition that in an environment often dominated by pressures of performance, the smallest acts of support become significant. And J-Hope's interpretation of Suga's surprise provided the lens through which people could appreciate that fact, giving the moment longevity and texture. so that by the time the day drew further along, the discussion no longer centered exclusively on the surprise itself, but had evolved into a narrative about how members continue to show one another quiet forms of encouragement, with J-Hope's words marking the thread that connected individual action to collective identity, shaping a gossip story that retained resonance precisely because it was grounded in the ordinariness of real relationships rather than the extraordinary nature of fame. As the narrative surrounding Suga's thoughtful gesture toward Jungkook and J-Hope's subsequent remarks reached a natural close, the coverage began to reflect less on the immediate spark of the event and more on the atmosphere it created within the community of fans and observers, because what started as a small moment evolved into a gentle reminder of how the group continues to sustain itself through the acknowledgement of one another. And J-Hope's role in shaping the perception of the surprise became an example of how members influence not only the internal bond of the team, but also the external dialogue that surrounds them, with his steady and balanced tone offering reassurance to fans that the relationships remain authentic and undisturbed by the pressures of fame. And as the day moved forward, reports consistently described how his commentary bridged the simplicity of Suga's action with the deeper values of companionship, creating a story that lingered longer than expected, not because it was dramatic, but because it was relatable. And in a media landscape often filled with exaggerated claims, this particular gossip found its strength in being grounded, offering readers a sense of connection that did not depend on spectacle. And for those who followed the group closely, J-Hope's presence as a commentator reinforced his position as someone who observes and articulates the essence of moments that might otherwise pass unnoticed, turning them into shared experiences for fans. And through this lens, the entire episode functioned as a snapshot of the everyday side of stardom, where recognition and care among colleagues hold as much weight as international stages. An entertainment analyst noted that the ease with which this story traveled across platforms was a testament to the public's appetite for authenticity, because the charm of such gossip lies in its ability to humanize figures often perceived as distant, showing that their bonds are maintained not by strategy, but by sincere interaction. And as discussion eventually quieted, what remained was the sense that J-Hope's words added depth to an otherwise straightforward moment, preserving it in collective memory as something more than a fleeting update, instead becoming part of a. In the aftermath of the discussions that unfolded across media outlets and online spaces, the atmosphere around the story gradually settled into a quieter rhythm, with J-Hope's remarks remaining as a reference point whenever the surprise from Suga to Jungkook was mentioned. And what became clearer as the day transitioned was that the narrative had completed its cycle, leaving behind not a burst of sensationalism, but a subtle reflection of how simple acts and thoughtful observations can sustain public interest when they come from a place of authenticity. And for many followers of BTS, this particular sequence of events served as another example of how the members continue to represent not only musical excellence, but also an enduring model of camaraderie that withstands the passage of time, with J-Hope's commentary functioning as a steady reminder that beyond the intensity of global schedules, there is always room for acknowledgement and appreciation among friends. And as the reporting concluded, entertainment writers began to note that the story's appeal lay not in novelty, but in familiarity, because fans have come to associate BTS with these quiet yet meaningful expressions that contrast the larger-than-life image projected on stage. And within this balance lies the reason why such gossip carries weight. It allows audiences to see them as individuals who sustain their bonds through everyday gestures. And J-Hope's recognition of Suga's effort toward Jungkook encapsulated this idea perfectly, ensuring that the narrative closed with a sense of completeness rather than lingering questions. And in this way, the fifth layer of coverage became less about adding new details and more about reflecting on what had already unfolded, situating the moment within the broader arc of the group's journey, where each member contributes not only through performance, but through the ways they support and validate one another. And by the end of the coverage cycle, the story had settled comfortably into the archive of everyday events that fans cherish, grounded in its ordinariness, yet elevated by the care with which it was noticed and shared, leaving a final impression that within the world of fame and constant attention, it is often the simplest exchanges, like a surprise quietly given and a supportive remark calmly expressed, that continue to hold the deepest resonance.